on news analysis. My first question to our guest in Washington, Dr. Tarpley. There was this article I was reading by one British photojournalist, Dr. Tarpley, who was briefly abducted in Syria, and he was saying that he was shocked by the fact that there was not a Syrian in his side among his abductors, and that he was shot by a British militant, that in fact several of his abductees had South London accents. So the question is this actually on the ground a US-led proxy war with all options in play in this quest for regime change, including the option of kidnappings?
Certainly, this has been a terrorist destabilization of Syria from the very beginning. My diagnosis has always been these are death squads. Al-Qaeda and similar groups provide the key personnel for the death squads. They're under NATO control in general. The Saudis, the other reactionary Gulf monarchies provide the money for the weapons, and the recruitment actually has gone on in countries from Morocco all the way to Pakistan, from Somalia all the way to Chechnya.
Just go to Dr. Tarpley now. I'll come back to you, Mr. Short. Some are saying, Dr. Tarpley, that the US and its allies are doing, as Dr. Short was saying there, what they did in Afghanistan against the Soviets. They created the militants there that then became Al-Qaeda, that then became their enemies. Are they creating another terrorist entity now in Syria? Would you agree with that analysis?
I think, again, the goal is to break up the current Syrian state, go for micro-states, mini-states, failed states, entities of all types. They're accusing Assad of wanting to break up the country, which I think is quite fantastic. Big news, however, today is that, according to some reports, the Syrian government forces have actually captured Turkish and Saudi active-duty military officers directing these rebels. So with this, it couldn't be clearer. This is a tentacle of NATO and of the Saudi monarchy, and those officers are on the ground. Now, we've had reports in the past that Syria had captured French officers. And of course, with Al-Qaeda, for the whole history of Al-Qaeda, the money has come from Saudi Arabia, right? That's how Osama bin Laden got started in the 1980s, as a kind of a bagman or paymaster. However, today the question is whether Saudi Arabia can continue to fulfill that role. Aren't the Saudis now looking very overextended? Aren't they facing a blowback from all these revolutions that they have fomented? Yesterday here in Washington, the Washington Post published an article by David Ignatius, who's tied into the State Department, and he quoted Press TV in one of his articles. He says, "Is Saudi Arabia on the brink of a revolution?" And he quoted the remarks made a couple of days ago by Mr. Ali Al-Ahmed on Press TV about the spreading of the rebellion inside Saudi Arabia, how the end of Ramadan will mark an escalation of this, right, and how indeed factions are beginning to form in the royal family that could lead to a destabilization of Saudi Arabia. This would, of course, put a monkey wrench into the NATO plans for Syria. Outburst from Hillary Clinton. She sounds like a lady in a big hurry, and part of it is that this is becoming an embarrassment to Obama's re-election campaign. But the other problem, again, is the logistical weakness. What happens if Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and some other Gulf states, and maybe Jordan, which could easily get sucked into this, what happens if you get revolutions starting in those countries? What does that do to the supply lines for these death squads inside Syria? So it seems to me there's a sense of urgency on the part of the NATO side. The other question is, how about some of these other places, right? Bahrain always deserves to be mentioned. There's a lot going on there the Western media don't talk about. There's Kuwait, the Emirates, Oman, and once again, Jordan. So all of these places, it seems to me, are actually ripe for real revolutions, which would probably aim at the overthrow of these outmoded, obsolete royal dynasties that have been trampling on human rights there for so long.
Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is August 10th, 2012, and I'm Darko. In today's report, I'm going to talk about Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, and also I'm going to segue into Russia and the Pacific. This first article I have up is Saudi Arabia intensifying crackdown on dissent. It says here Saudi authorities are deploying a range of judicial methods to stifle the country's pro-democracy and human rights campaigners in a crackdown on dissent that includes jail terms and travel bans, according to activists. The Gulf dictatorship and world's top oil exporter has a low tolerance for public dissent and is one of the most repressive states in the world. The kingdom has no codified legal system, and most top government jobs are held by high-ranking royals. Saudi Arabia moved swiftly to stifle any popular unrest, as seen by other Arab states. They're talking about Bahrain, where I saw a report or article that was alleging that they were dressing up as Bahraini police officers, the Saudis that is, but continues to face protests in the eastern Qatif region. So this is important because this is basically what Tarpley and them were just talking about. And we have this article, Saudi Arabia to shoot down Iran-bound Israeli planes. And I just had to think twice. I'm like, what? You know? Saudi Arabia has threatened to shoot down any Israeli aircraft over its airspace en route to or from Iran, the Israeli newspaper reported. So, mostly because both Israel and the United States have said they may consider a military strike to put a stop to Iran's disputed uranium enrichment program. And it goes on and says that Saudi Arabia was one of 4 air routes identified by Israel's intelligence for a possible attack on Iran. Also, Saudi Arabia is equipped with U.S.-made fighter jets and sophisticated defense systems. So who knows? Maybe it's just talk from the Saudi royalty, basically down to the people to make it think that they're not on Israel's side. So maybe there is something going on in Saudi Arabia as far as dissent. Then talking about the Gulf state despots, says a cooperation council for the Arab states of the Gulf, GCC, comprised 6 nations: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. In principle, Kuwait and Bahrain are considered constitutional monarchs. In practice, all 6 are autocracies. So, with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE and Oman are really absolute monarchs. So, one of the truths out of these 10 that they provided here on Land Destroyer website was number 4. Saudi Arabia has been to this day the primary underwriter of the notorious international terror organization Al-Qaeda, created along with the Saudi Arabia's longtime ally, the United States. Money, weapons, and directives are laundered through the Saudis to maintain both plausible deniability for the Americans and to maintain a degree of credibility for Al-Qaeda's sectarian extremist foot soldiers across the Muslim world. Saudi Arabia maintains an extensive re-education program internationally to pervert the tenets of Islam as a means of keeping Al-Qaeda's ranks full and fueling Wall Street and London's engineered clash of civilizations. They're talking about pro-democracy, right? Because they just ignore the fact that these kingdoms are totally undemocratic, right? Dictatorships, and they don't say anything about the repression or the lack of human rights that go on in those countries, but they focus on places like Syria, Libya, Iraq. So it says Saudi Arabian corporate financier interests run by the royal family are tied directly to Wall Street and London via conglomerations like the U.S. Saudi Arabian Business Council and representation upon the J.P. Morgan International Council. So links will be posted in YouTube's video description. You can go out and check this article out. It goes, basically ties the whole history of the 9/11 terrorists known as Osama bin Laden was basically a creation of the U.S.-Saudi alliance and the bin Laden family. So, but finishing up, Saudi Arabia, as we all know, or most of us should know, played an active role in the violent destabilization of the governments around the world, including most recently Libya and Syria, that using the sectarian extremists indoctrinated at the Saudi-funded foul mosque and madrasas, armed and funded by Saudi cash, is the standard method of operation for these destabilizations. And speaking of Syria, Syria reportedly captures foreign military officers. UN chief won't condemn kidnapping of Iranians. So, Syrian media is reporting the capture of military officers from foreign nations in Aleppo, the city which has heavy presence of Western-backed Free Syrian Army terrorist organization. The Secretary General of the UN is refusing to condemn the kidnapping of Iranian pilgrims in Syria. And some breaking news that came in just recently. Syrian and Jordanian troops clash at the border, says report involving armored vehicles that broke out Friday night between Jordanian and Syrian troops in the border region. They cited Jordanian sources and unnamed Syrian opposition activists who witnessed the incident. So take it for what it is. It says the area has been used as a passage by Syrian refugees fleeing the violence. In other words, going there, wreaking havoc, and then getting out of Dodge before the government comes and kills them. It says here the clashes reportedly occurred after a number of refugees attempted to cross into Jordan. Let's not forget the article that I just covered where it was that these Free Syrian Army were actually killing these civilians that were trying to leave Syria. So, Lebanese security forces detain pro-Syria former minister. That's right, they dragged him out of his bed in the middle of the night while sleeping with his wife. So they said it was for security reasons, but his wife said the intelligence forces affiliated with the anti-Syrian March 14th movement have arrested her husband for political reasons. A rebel fighter falls in Aleppo, but this one was from Istanbul. That's right. An Istanbul Turkish lawyer, basically, with radical Islamist views, told colleagues he was traveling near the Syrian border to attend a trial. In fact, he crossed into Syria to join the terrorist group to help create the destabilization of a sovereign country. The lawyer was shot and killed by regime forces in Aleppo on Saturday. Oh yeah, just want to make sure I got this in there. He has become a martyr, God willing, said a colleague. Oh, a colleague. My fellow terrorists, my fellow colleagues. UK sends $5 million to listed terrorists in Syria. US-UK listed terrorist organization Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. Fighters and commanders are clearly amongst militants underwritten by latest UK funding. This is in direct violation of both American and British anti-terrorism legislation. And these weapons that are coming in and being funded by Saudi Arabia and the United States are coming through ambulances. They're using ambulances to smuggle the weapons into Syria. So during a visit, the villagers informed this lawmaker, a Turkish lawmaker, that on the borders there's these military bases being set up against the Syrian forces. He expressed surprise at the sight of Turkey's military support for the anti-Damascus armed gangs in the region. If it's true, it's absolutely unacceptable, he said. Syrian insurgents seized 3 journalists near Damascus. Some more journalists are scooped up by the terrorists. So, and NATO's fleet is coming to Syria. Britain and France will soon be sending their fleet to the eastern Mediterranean, a powerful grouping of the Navy, Western media reported, citing sources in the British military. France will be represented by a compound aircraft carrier. Also, they're going to have helicopters, large amphibious assault ships, 400 Marines on board, as well as a destroyer and submarine. White House officials says Syria no-fly zone not off the table. U.S. has done a number of things to support Syrian opposition, most of Syrian opposition not of Al-Qaeda link. They say Al-Qaeda ilk. France deploys troops to Syria-Jordan border. France has sent troops to the Syrian border with Jordan amid reports of escalating foreign support for the terrorists fighting the government of Syria. That's interesting. France just sends troops over there. Now what? Syrian and Jordanian troops clash at the border. Oh, but it's just to help refugees. So yeah, they probably weren't part of that. Like most of them aren't from the Al-Qaeda ilk. U.S. fabricates lies on Iran to sell arms to Persian Gulf states, says U.S. Daily, in the pretext of the Iran threat to sell massive amounts of arms to the Persian Gulf kingdoms in a failed effort to establish a united alliance among the dictatorships in the oil-rich region. That's right, global arms market hits post-Cold War high point, so good for the military-industrial complex on all sides. So this is based off Iran's nuclear program, despite Israeli leak. The U.S. intelligence still soured on Iran's lack of nuke program, so they pounced on the opportunity to push the U.S. to war, but Obama administration still says Iranian nukes is far off. So Egypt may be hyping the Sinai offensive for Israel's sake. The crackdown reportedly didn't impress Sinai residents who saw no evidence of fighting and witnessed soldiers firing into the air. So it sounds familiar, just like Libya and Syria, right? And on Wednesday, the Egyptian military launched airstrikes in the area. But Egypt apparently got permission from the Israeli security cabinet on Thursday to conduct further helicopter airstrikes. So their army claimed up to 20 terrorists were killed, but witnesses told Reuters they had seen no fighting. The key here is the offensive is crucial to maintaining good relations with Israel, Reuters reported, which may explain Egypt's apparent efforts to hype the offensive. While Israeli defense forces entered Egypt to block migrants, they're operating in Sinai to intercept African migrants and hand them over to Egyptian forces. France is even preparing for an evacuation of nationals in Israel. So this move makes it possible that Israel may in fact strike Iran before November elections, or their intelligence is showing that they may actually be a target. Even so, the United States and the Gulf allies pursue a missile shield against Iranian attacks. Remember this, U.S. is shifting 60% of its warships to the Pacific. Also, the U.S. cleanup in Vietnam is meant to monitor Russian activities there. And as Russia hints of a Chinese threat in the Far East, they're reopening their naval bases around the world. And the Polish president says U.S. missile deployment is a mistake, so the United States is to station troops in Poland for the first time.